James Carville was not a man who shied away from speaking his mind. Known for his sharp wit and bold opinions, he had spent decades making headlines with his unfiltered takes on politics, culture, and everything in between. Whether he was debating, on television, or writing columns for major newspapers, James always seemed to have something to say, and he rarely held back. But this time his words were about to spark a controversy that would catch the attention of millions across the country. It all started one crisp morning in a bustling New York City studio. James had been invited to appear on a popular morning talk show hosted by Lisa Morgan, a charismatic woman known for her ability to keep even the most heated discussions civil. The topic of conversation that day was broad: current events, political, trends, and the ever-present influence of former President Donald Trump. Lisa began the segment by asking James about his thoughts on Trump's ongoing role in American politics. "Well," James said with a smirk, leaning back in his chair as the bright studio lights glared down at him, "Donald Trump is like a storm. You can't ignore him, and you can't escape him. He's still shaping the way people think, whether we like it or not." The audience chuckled, but Lisa pressed further. "What about Melania?" she asked. "She's been quieter since leaving the White House, but she's still very much in the public eye. What do you make of her role in all of this?" James paused for a moment, his expression shifting slightly. He adjusted his tie and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Melania Trump," he began, his tone dripping with skepticism, "is an interesting case. I'll give her credit. She's handled herself with composure during some tough times, but let's be honest here. Their marriage? It feels transactional, like she's just going through the motions to support his image while keeping her distance from the chaos." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "That's a strong statement. Do you think she genuinely supports his policies, or is she just playing along?" "Oh, I think it's more about survival than anything else," James replied without hesitation. "Look, I'm not saying she doesn't care about certain issues. She did launch that campaign against cyberbullying. What was it called again? Be Best? Sure, fine, good for her. But when you look at the bigger picture, it's hard not to see her role as part of a larger strategy. Everything they do is calculated, polished, designed to keep the spotlight exactly where they want it." The studio fell silent for a moment, the weight of James's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, murmurs of agreement and disapproval rippled through the audience. Some nodded vigorously, clearly aligning with James's perspective. Others frowned, visibly uncomfortable with his harsh assessment. Lisa, ever the professional, tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. "Interesting take," she said diplomatically. "Do you think there's any room for nuance here? Maybe we're oversimplifying things by assuming it's all about appearances." But James wasn't having it. "Nuance is great," he shot back. "But let's not kid ourselves. Politics isn't about subtlety. It's about power. And in this case, Melania's presence serves a purpose. Love it or hate it, that's just how it works." By the time the segment ended, James's comments had already begun to spread like wildfire. Clips of the interview were shared online, sparking debates across social media platforms. Supporters praised him for calling out what they saw as obvious truths, while critics accused him of being unnecessarily harsh and dismissive. Among those watching the fallout unfold was Kevin Leavitt, a conservative commentator based in Washington, D.C. Kevin was no stranger to controversy. With a career built on challenging liberal narratives and defending conservative values, he had earned a reputation for being both outspoken and fair-minded. Unlike many pundits who thrived on outrage, Kevin prided himself on grounding his arguments in facts and logic. When he heard James's accusations about Melania Trump, he felt a surge of frustration, not because he disagreed with every point James made, but because he believed the overall tone was unfair and lacking in depth. "Transactional?" Kevin muttered to himself as he sat in his home office, scrolling through Twitter. "Is that really the best we can do? Reduce someone's life and choices to a single word?" To Kevin, Melania represented something different, a figure who had navigated immense scrutiny with quiet dignity. While she may not have been as vocal as other first ladies, her actions spoke volumes. From her advocacy work to her efforts to shield her son from the relentless glare of the media, Kevin saw a woman who was deeply committed to protecting her family and using her platform responsibly. Determined to respond, Kevin reached out to several producers, securing a spot on the same talk show where James had made his remarks. By the time he arrived at the studio 2 days later, the nation was abuzz with anticipation. Would Kevin defend Melania effectively? Or would James's accusations stand unchallenged? As Kevin took his seat across from Lisa Morgan, he exuded confidence. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and a crisp white shirt, he greeted the host warmly, before turning his attention to the camera. "Thanks for having me," he said with a smile. "I know this topic has generated a lot of discussion, and I'm looking forward to sharing my perspective." Lisa wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. "Kevin, let's address the elephant in the room." James Carville recently described Melania Trump's relationship with her husband as transactional. He also questioned whether she genuinely supports his policies. "What are your thoughts?" Kevin nodded thoughtfully, taking a deep breath, before responding. "First of all, I think it's important to recognize that everyone is entitled to their opinion. But when we start labeling relationships or dismissing someone's contributions based on assumptions, we cross a line. Melania Trump has faced incredible challenges throughout her time in the public eye, and yet she's remained steadfast in her commitment to causes she believes in." He went on to highlight specific examples of Melania's work, from her visits to hospitals and schools to her international diplomacy efforts. Her Be Best campaign wasn't just about cyberbullying, it was about empowering children to make positive choices in their lives. That's a message worth celebrating, regardless of your political affiliation. Lisa listened intently, nodding along as Kevin continued. "As for her marriage, I don't claim to know the intimate details of their relationship. But what I do know is that reducing it to a transaction undermines the complexity of their lives. They've been together for years through highs and lows, and I think it's unfair to dismiss that as purely strategic." The audience erupted into applause, many clearly moved by Kevin's passionate defense. Back in his apartment, James watched the segment unfold with growing unease. For the first time in a long while, he found himself questioning his own words. Had he been too quick to judge? Was there more to Melania's story than he had initially considered? These questions lingered in his mind long after the show ended, planting seeds of doubt that would soon grow into something far more profound. Little did James know, this unexpected clash of perspectives was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge him in ways he never anticipated. For now, however, the world remained divided, some siding with James's critical stance, others rallying behind Kevin's defense of Melania. Amidst the noise and debate, one thing was clear: the conversation was far from over. Kevin Leavitt's appearance on Lisa Morgan's talk show marked a turning point in the growing debate over James Carville's controversial remarks about Melania Trump. While James had sparked the conversation with his sharp accusations, Kevin's calm and thoughtful response struck a chord with viewers across the country. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His tone was measured, his arguments backed by facts, and his respect for Melania evident in every word. By the time the segment ended, many who had initially agreed with James found themselves reconsidering their stance. Lisa Morgan, ever the skilled host, did her best to keep the discussion balanced. "Kevin," she said after his opening remarks, "you've made some strong points here. But let's be honest, there are people out there who still feel that Melania hasn't been as active or vocal as other first ladies. How do you respond to that criticism?" Kevin leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful but firm. "I understand where that perspective comes from," he began. "After all, we're used to seeing first ladies take on highly visible roles, whether it's Michelle Obama promoting healthy eating or Hillary Clinton advocating for healthcare reform. But comparing Melania to past first ladies misses the point. Every woman who steps into that role brings her own style, her own priorities, and her own way of making an impact." He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts before continuing. Melania chose to focus on issues that mattered deeply to her, like children's well-being and cyberbullying. And while her approach might not have been as flashy or high-profile as others, that doesn't mean it was any less meaningful. In fact, I'd argue that her quiet determination speaks volumes about her character. The audience seemed captivated, hanging on Kevin's every word. Even Lisa appeared impressed, nodding along as he spoke. "That's a fair point," she admitted. But James Carville's comments suggest that her efforts were more about maintaining appearances than genuine advocacy. Do you think there's any merit to that argument? Kevin didn't hesitate. "Not at all," he replied firmly. When someone dedicates years of their life to raising awareness about critical issues, even when they're constantly under a microscope, they deserve credit for their work. Sure, being a political spouse comes with its own set of expectations, but reducing Melania's contributions to mere optics is unfair and dismissive. As Kevin wrapped up his response, the studio erupted into applause. Viewers watching at home couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his composed demeanor and James's earlier bluntness. Social media lit up almost immediately, with hashtags like Respect Melania and Leavitt for Logic trending within hours. Supporters praised Kevin for standing up for someone they believed had been unfairly maligned, while critics accused him of being overly sentimental. Meanwhile, James Carville sat in his living room, replaying the segment over and over again. At first, he tried to brush off Kevin's rebuttal as typical conservative pushback. After all, James had spent decades engaging in heated debates with opponents on both sides of the aisle. He was no stranger to criticism, and he usually shrugged it off without giving it much thought. But this time felt different. There was something about Kevin's tone that stuck with him, something that made him question whether he jumped to conclusions too quickly. For all his confidence during the original interview, James realized he hadn't done much research beyond surface-level observations. He knew the basics of Melania's Be Best campaign, but he hadn't dug deeper into its goals or achievements. Instead, he'd relied on assumptions and generalizations, a habit he often criticized in others. Unable to shake the feeling that he'd missed something important, James decided to revisit the topic. He pulled out his laptop and started searching for information about Melania's initiatives. What he found surprised him. Clips of her speaking passionately about the dangers of online harassment popped up alongside photos of her visiting hospitals and schools. Articles highlighted her efforts to bring attention to issues affecting children, from bullying to opioid addiction. There was even footage of her addressing the United Nations, urging world leaders to prioritize child welfare. James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he processed what he was seeing. Maybe Kevin had been right. Maybe there was more to Melania than met the eye. The realization hit him hard, forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth. He had underestimated her. Back in Washington, D.C., Kevin was unaware of the impact his words were having on James. Instead, he was focused on the overwhelming response from viewers who had reached out to thank him for defending Melania. Among them was Rachel Dawson, a freelance journalist, known for her insightful profiles of public figures. Intrigued by Kevin's articulate defense, Rachel sent him a direct message on Twitter asking if he'd be open to discussing the issue further for an article she was writing. Kevin agreed, and the two arranged to meet virtually later that week. During their conversation, Rachel asked him what motivated him to speak so passionately about Melania. "To be honest," Kevin said, leaning closer to his webcam, "it's not just about Melania herself. It's about the broader culture of dismissing people based on stereotypes or incomplete information. We live in an era where everyone wants quick takes and easy answers, but real life is rarely that simple. When someone like Melania faces relentless scrutiny, it's important to look beyond the headlines and consider the full picture." Rachel nodded, jotting down notes as she listened. "Do you think people are starting to see things differently because of your response?" "I hope so," Kevin replied with a small smile. "At the very least, I think it sparked a conversation that needed to happen. Whether people agree with me or not, I'm glad we're talking about these issues, instead of brushing them aside." Their discussion lasted nearly an hour, leaving Rachel with plenty of material for her article. As she drafted the piece, she couldn't help but admire Kevin's commitment to thoughtful discourse. Unlike many commentators who thrived on conflict, Kevin seemed genuinely interested in fostering understanding, even among those who disagreed with him. While Kevin's star continued to rise, James grappled with his internal conflict. He knew he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at him. For days he wrestled with the idea of publicly acknowledging his misstep, but pride kept getting in the way. Admitting he was wrong wasn't something James did lightly, especially when it came to matters of politics. Still, the more he reflected on Kevin's arguments, the clearer it became that staying silent wasn't an option. Finally, one evening, James sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He stared at the blank document for several minutes, unsure of how to begin. Then slowly, he started typing. Sometimes, even those of us who spend our lives analyzing politics can fall into the trap of oversimplification, he wrote. In my recent comments about Melania Trump, I may have done just that. While I stand by my belief that relationships in the public eye are complex, I realize now that I didn't give enough weight to the substance of Melania's work. Her advocacy for children and her efforts to address cyberbullying deserve recognition, regardless of one's political views. He hesitated before adding a final line. To Kevin Leavitt, whose thoughtful response challenged me to rethink my assumptions, I owe you thanks. When the post went live the next morning, it quickly gained traction. Supporters praised James for his willingness to admit fault, while skeptics questioned whether his apology was sincere. Either way, the gesture signaled a shift in the narrative, one that emphasized humility and openness over stubbornness and division. For Kevin, reading James's words was unexpected but gratifying. He appreciated the acknowledgement, not because it validated his perspective, but because it demonstrated a willingness to engage in meaningful dialogue. In a world increasingly defined by polarization, moments like this felt rare, and all the more valuable because of it. As the days turned into weeks, the controversy surrounding James's initial remarks began to fade. Yet its legacy lingered, reminding everyone involved and countless others who followed the story that even the most contentious debates could lead to growth and understanding. Little did they know, however, that this was only the beginning. The seeds planted by their exchange would soon blossom into opportunities neither of them could have anticipated, proving once again that sometimes change starts with a single conversation. James Carville's public acknowledgement of his misstep sent ripples through the media landscape. It wasn't every day that someone as outspoken and confident as James admitted to being wrong, especially in such a public forum. His post, which praised Kevin Leavitt for challenging his assumptions, quickly became one of the most talked about moments of the week. Social media users were divided. Some applauded James for his humility, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether his apology was genuine or merely a calculated move to save face. Despite the mixed reactions, James felt a strange sense of relief after sharing his thoughts. For days, he had wrestled with the weight of his earlier comments about Melania Trump, unsure of how to address them without appearing weak or indecisive. But now that the words were out there, he realized something important. Admitting fault didn't make him any less credible, it made him human. Still, James couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. A simple online post wasn't enough to fully repair the damage caused by his initial remarks. He decided to take a deeper dive into Melania's work, not just to educate himself, but also to show his audience that he was serious about learning from his mistakes. Over the next few weeks, James began researching her initiatives, reading interviews she had given, and watching videos of her speeches. What he discovered surprised him. Melania's Be Best campaign, which he had once dismissed as superficial, turned out to be far more nuanced than he had assumed. The program focused on 3 key areas: well-being, social media use, and opioid abuse. Each issue was carefully chosen to address challenges faced by children growing up in a rapidly changing world. In interviews, Melania spoke passionately about the importance of teaching kids to navigate the pitfalls of technology and the dangers of substance abuse. Her calm yet determined demeanor stood in stark contrast to the flashy personas often associated with political figures. James found himself particularly moved by a video clip of Melania visiting a hospital where children were recovering from injuries sustained in school shootings. She sat quietly beside their beds, holding their hands and listening to their stories. There was no grand speech, no photo op designed to grab headlines, just a woman offering comfort in a time of need. Watching the footage, James felt a pang of guilt. How could he have reduced her efforts to mere optics? Meanwhile, Kevin Leavitt continued to receive praise for his thoughtful defense of Melania. Rachel Dawson's article about their conversation had been published, and it quickly gained traction online. Readers appreciated Kevin's balanced approach, noting how rare it was to see someone advocate for understanding in an era dominated by divisive rhetoric. The piece also highlighted Kevin's broader philosophy that healthy debates should focus on facts and empathy rather than personal attacks. Inspired by the positive response, Kevin decided to expand on his ideas. He started drafting a series of essays exploring the importance of respectful discourse in politics. Drawing from his experience responding to James's accusations, Kevin argued that meaningful conversations required more than just strong opinions. They demanded openness, curiosity, and a willingness to listen. While working on his essays, Kevin received an unexpected invitation. A prominent news network asked him to co-host a special panel discussion on civility and public debates. The timing couldn't have been better. With tensions running high across the country, audiences were hungry for content that encouraged constructive dialogue. Kevin eagerly accepted the offer, seeing it as an opportunity to promote the values he believed in. The panel featured a diverse group of commentators, including journalists, academics, and activists. Each participant brought a unique perspective to the table, creating a dynamic and engaging discussion. At one point, the moderator turned to Kevin and asked, "Do you think it's possible for people with opposing views to find common ground in today's polarized climate?" Kevin smiled before answering. "Absolutely," he said. "It's not easy, but it's possible. The key is to focus on shared goals rather than differences. For example, whether you're liberal or conservative, we all want what's best for our families and communities. If we start from that foundation, we can build bridges instead of walls." His response earned nods of approval from the other panelists, including Sarah Bennett, a progressive commentator who had initially been wary of Kevin's conservative leanings. After the event, Sarah approached Kevin to thank him for his insights. "I have to admit," she said with a grin, "you're not at all what I expected. You actually made me rethink some of my assumptions about conservatives." Kevin chuckled. "Well, I could say the same about liberals like you. Maybe we should team up sometime and tackle these issues together." Sarah laughed but didn't dismiss the idea outright. Who knows? Stranger things have happened. As Kevin left the studio that evening, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Conversations like the ones he'd had on the panel reminded him why he had entered the world of commentary in the first place, to foster understanding and bridge divides. Back in New Orleans, James was experiencing a similar shift. After immersing himself in research about Melania Trump, he decided to revisit some of his past statements about other public figures. He realized that his tendency to make sweeping generalizations wasn't limited to this particular controversy. It was a pattern he needed to break. Determined to grow, James began incorporating more nuance into his analyses, challenging himself to look beyond surface-level impressions. One afternoon, while preparing for an upcoming TV appearance, James received a call from Lisa Morgan, the host of the talk show where the entire saga had begun. "Hey James," she said cheerfully. "How would you feel about coming back on the show to discuss your recent reflections? I think it could be a great follow-up to everything that's happened." James hesitated for a moment. Returning to the same platform where he had sparked, the controversy felt daunting, but he knew it was the right thing to do. "Sure," he replied. "Let's do it." When the day of the interview arrived, James walked into the studio with a mix of nerves and determination. As he took his seat across from Lisa, he noticed a familiar face in the audience, Kevin Leavitt. For a brief moment, James considered ignoring him, but then he remembered his own advice. Meaningful conversations required openness. So, when the camera started rolling, James addressed Kevin directly. "Kevin," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I want to thank you again for pushing me to rethink my assumptions. Your response to my comments about Melania was exactly what I needed to hear. It reminded me that even those of us who spend our lives analyzing politics can sometimes lose sight of the bigger picture." Kevin, caught off guard by the gesture, smiled warmly. Appreciate that, James. And I'll say this. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. Not everyone is willing to do that. The exchange set the tone for the rest of the segment, which focused on the importance of humility and growth in public discourse. James shared his journey of self-reflection, emphasizing the value of digging deeper before forming opinions. Lisa, visibly moved by the conversation, thanked both men for modeling the kind of dialogue she hoped to see more of in the media. By the time the show ended, viewers were buzzing with excitement. Social media lit up with posts praising James and Kevin for their maturity and willingness to engage in honest conversation. Some even suggested they collaborate on future projects, citing their ability to challenge each other respectfully as a model for others to follow. For James and Kevin, the experience marked a turning point, not just in their careers but also in their personal growth. They had started as adversaries, locked in a heated debate over a contentious topic. But through humility, reflection, and a shared commitment to understanding, they had forged an unlikely connection. Little did they know, however, that their newfound respect for each other would soon lead to opportunities neither of them could have anticipated. The seeds of collaboration planted during their exchange were beginning to sprout, hinting at possibilities that extended far beyond the confines of a single controversy. In the weeks that followed, James and Kevin crossed paths several more times, at industry events, on talk shows, and even during casual dinners arranged by mutual friends. Each meeting reinforced their belief that meaningful dialogue could transcend ideological divides. While they still disagreed on many issues, they found joy in exploring those differences through respectful debate. As the months passed, their friendship grew stronger, inspiring others to adopt a similar mindset. In a world often defined by division, James and Kevin proved that change was possible, one conversation at a time. The unexpected friendship between James Carville and Kevin Leavitt began to take shape in ways neither man had anticipated. What started as a heated debate over Melania Trump's role in politics had evolved into something far more meaningful, a mutual respect that transcended their ideological differences. As they continued to interact both privately and publicly, they discovered that their shared passion for thoughtful discourse could be a powerful tool for fostering understanding in a divided world. James, who had spent decades entrenched in liberal politics, found himself fascinated by Kevin's conservative perspective. Despite their opposing views on many issues, Kevin's ability to articulate his arguments with clarity and respect impressed James. He admired how Kevin avoided resorting to personal attacks or exaggerations, even when discussing topics that sparked intense emotions. For his part, Kevin appreciated James's sharp intellect and willingness to challenge his own assumptions. Though they often disagreed, their conversations were always engaging and productive, leaving both men with new insights to consider. One evening, after attending a political conference together, James and Kevin decided to grab dinner at a quiet restaurant nearby. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. No, James said, swirling his glass thoughtfully. I never expected us to end up here. I mean, you and me sitting down like this having civil conversations? A few months ago I would have laughed at the idea. Kevin chuckled, nodding in agreement. Same here. When I first heard your comments about Melania, I'll admit I was frustrated, but now, looking back, I think it's one of the best things that could have happened for both of us. James raised an eyebrow. Really? Even though my initial remarks were so off base? Absolutely, Kevin replied. Your apology showed people that it's okay to admit when you're wrong. And our discussions since then have reminded everyone, including ourselves, that we can disagree without being disagreeable. That's rare these days. Their conversation shifted to the broader state of public discourse. Both men agreed that the current climate was toxic, with too much emphasis on sensationalism and not enough on substance. They lamented how social media amplified outrage, encouraging people to dig their heels in rather than seek common ground. We need to change the narrative, James said firmly. People are tired of yelling matches. They want solutions, not sound bites. Kevin nodded, Exactly. And I think we're in a unique position to help lead that change. Why not use our platforms to promote respectful dialogue instead of feeding into the chaos? The idea resonated with James, sparking a plan that grew clearer as they talked. By the end of the meal, they had sketched out the framework for a joint project, a podcast where they would tackle controversial topics head-on, challenging each other's views, while modeling civility and intellectual honesty. Over the next few weeks, James and Kevin worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They reached out to friends in the media industry for advice, secured funding from a production company eager to support innovative content, and brainstormed episode ideas that would appeal to audiences across the political spectrum. The title they settled on was simple yet powerful: Bridging the Divide. When the first episode aired, listeners were captivated. In it, James and Kevin introduced themselves, explaining how their unlikely partnership came to be. They recounted the controversy surrounding Melania Trump and described how their initial clash led to deeper conversations and eventual friendship. "We're not here to tell you what to think," Kevin explained during the opening segment. "We're here to encourage you to think critically, to question assumptions, listen to different perspectives, and engage in meaningful dialogue." James chimed in, adding, "And don't worry, we're still going to disagree plenty, but we promise to do it respectfully, with facts and fairness guiding the way." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Reviews poured in from listeners, praising the duo for their refreshing approach to political commentary. Many noted how rare it was to hear two people with opposing views engage in such constructive debate. Others expressed gratitude for the sense of hope the podcast inspired, reminding them that compromise and understanding were still possible. As word spread, Bridging the Divide gained traction, attracting high-profile guests eager to join the conversation. Among them was Rachel Dawson, the freelance journalist who had previously interviewed Kevin about his defense of Melania. Rachel appeared on the third episode to discuss her experiences covering contentious stories and the challenges journalists faced in staying objective amidst polarized audiences. During the interview, Rachel shared her thoughts on why James and Kevin's collaboration was so impactful. "What makes this podcast special is its authenticity," she said. "You can tell that James and Kevin genuinely care about finding common ground. It's not just an act, it's who they are." Her words struck a chord with both men, reinforcing their commitment to the project. They began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and universities, where they discussed the importance of bridging divides in everyday life. Their message resonated deeply, particularly among younger audiences who craved alternatives to the divisive rhetoric dominating mainstream media. Meanwhile, Melania Trump herself became aware of the growing movement inspired by the debates surrounding her public image. While she rarely engaged directly with media coverage, she couldn't help but feel a sense of validation knowing that her efforts had sparked meaningful conversations. Friends close to her reported that she quietly followed James and Kevin's podcast, appreciating their balanced approach to discussing complex issues. Back in New Orleans, James reflected on how much his perspective had shifted since the controversy began. He no longer viewed public figures solely through the lens of partisan politics. Instead, he sought to understand the motivations behind their actions. This newfound openness extended beyond his professional work, influencing his personal relationships as well. "I used to think I had all the answers," James admitted to a colleague one day. "Now I realize I don't, and that's okay. Growth starts with admitting you don't know everything." Kevin experienced a similar transformation. Collaborating with James taught him the value of patience and empathy, qualities he had always admired but hadn't fully embraced until now. He also discovered that engaging with someone from the opposite side of the aisle didn't weaken his convictions, it strengthened them. By testing his beliefs against rigorous scrutiny, he gained a deeper understanding of why he held them in the first place. As the months passed, James and Kevin's partnership blossomed into something greater than either had imagined. Their podcast became a beacon of hope for those disillusioned by the state of modern politics, proving that respectful dialogue could thrive even in the most contentious environments. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt within themselves. Through their journey, they learned that true progress required more than just talking. It demanded listening, humility, and a willingness to embrace discomfort. Together, they showed the world that bridges could be built, one conversation at a time. Little did they know, however, that their story was far from over. New challenges lay ahead, testing the strength of their bond and pushing them to continue redefining what it meant to engage in meaningful dialogue. As Bridging the Divide gained popularity, James Carville and Kevin Leavitt found themselves navigating uncharted territory. The podcast had become more than just a platform for discussing politics. It was now a movement inspiring people to rethink how they approach disagreements. Yet with success came new challenges, testing the strength of their partnership and forcing them to confront issues they hadn't anticipated. One of the first hurdles arose during an episode about climate change. While both men agreed on the urgency of addressing environmental concerns, their solutions differed sharply. James argued for sweeping government intervention, citing examples from other countries that had successfully implemented green policies. Kevin, however, emphasized the role of private innovation and individual responsibility, warning against regulations he believed could stifle economic growth. The debate grew heated at times, with each man passionately defending his position. For a moment, it seemed like old habits might resurface, the kind of divisive rhetoric they had sworn to avoid. But then, something remarkable happened. Midway through the episode, James paused and took a deep breath. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I get where you're coming from, Kevin, I really do. And honestly, maybe we don't have to choose one approach over the other. What if there's room for both, government action and private innovation?" Kevin nodded slowly, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's fair," he replied. "Maybe the real challenge isn't picking sides but figuring out how to combine our strengths." Their ability to find common ground, even on such a polarizing issue, resonated deeply with listeners. Reviews praised the episode as one of the most insightful discussions they'd ever heard on climate policy. It reinforced the idea that progress often required compromise, a lesson James and Kevin were learning firsthand. Despite moments like these, not everyone supported their efforts. Critics accused them of being too idealistic, claiming their emphasis on civility ignored the harsh realities of modern politics. Others dismissed the podcast as a publicity stunt, arguing that meaningful change required more than just talk. James and Kevin were aware of the criticism, but they refused to let it deter them. Instead, they used it as motivation to push harder, hosting live events across the country where audience members could participate in open dialogues. These town halls became safe spaces for people to voice their opinions, ask tough questions, and engage with those who held opposing views. At one event in Chicago, a young woman named Emily stood up and addressed the crowd. "I've always been afraid to speak my mind because I didn't want to offend anyone," she admitted. "But listening to you two has made me realize that staying silent doesn't help anyone. So here goes. I think we need to start focusing less on what divides us and more on what connects us." Her words brought applause from the audience and smiles from James and Kevin. Moments like this reminded them why they had started the project in the first place, to empower others to join the conversation. Meanwhile, their growing influence caught the attention of influential figures outside the political sphere. One day, while preparing for an upcoming episode, James received an email from Rachel Dawson. She suggested inviting a celebrity guest to discuss the intersection of entertainment and activism. After some deliberation, they reached out to Julia Monroe, a well-known actress and advocate for mental health awareness. Julia accepted the invitation, bringing her unique perspective to the podcast. During the interview, she shared stories about using her platform to destigmatize mental illness and encouraged listeners to prioritize empathy in their daily lives. Her appearance drew in a wider audience, introducing Bridging the Divide to people who might not typically engage with political content. The success of the episode inspired James and Kevin to expand their focus beyond traditional political topics. They began exploring issues like education reform, healthcare access, and criminal justice, always striving to highlight diverse voices and experiences. Each conversation added depth to their mission, proving that bridging divides wasn't limited to partisan politics. It applied to every aspect of society. Back in Washington, D.C., Kevin reflected on how much his life had changed since the controversy over Melania Trump. He no longer saw himself as just a commentator. He viewed his work as part of something bigger, a collective effort to heal a fractured nation. His essays on respectful discourse, which had initially been a personal project, were now being published in major outlets, reaching readers around the world. James, too, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. For years, he had prided himself on winning arguments and proving opponents wrong. Now he derived satisfaction from fostering understanding, even when it meant admitting he didn't have all the answers. Their journey culminated in an unexpected opportunity, a televised special, hosted by Lisa Morgan, the same talk show host who had sparked the initial debate, titled Finding Common Ground. The program featured James and Kevin alongside a panel of experts discussing ways to combat polarization. During the broadcast, Lisa asked them what advice they would give to viewers hoping to bridge divides in their own communities. Start small, James advised. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Just listen to someone with a different perspective and try to understand where they're coming from. That's how change begins. Kevin added, and don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. Growth happens when we're willing to learn from others, even if it challenges what we believe. The special aired to critical acclaim, cementing James and Kevin's status as unlikely champions of unity. Viewers flooded social media with messages expressing gratitude for their efforts, many vowing to adopt similar approaches in their own lives. In the months that followed, James and Kevin continued to build on their success. They launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting civil discourse, offering workshops and resources for schools, businesses, and community groups. Their podcast remained a cornerstone of their work, tackling increasingly complex topics while maintaining its commitment to respect and understanding. For Melania Trump, whose name had once been at the center of the storm, the legacy of the controversy took on a quiet significance. Though she rarely commented publicly, friends close to her reported that she appreciated the positive impact her story had inspired. In interviews, Kevin often credited her resilience as a catalyst for his own growth, reminding audiences that even the most polarizing figures deserved compassion and fairness. As time went on, James and Kevin's friendship deepened, becoming a testament to the power of dialogue. They celebrated milestones together, book deals, speaking tours, and awards, but also supported each other through personal struggles, proving that their bond extended far beyond professional collaboration. Looking back, neither man could have predicted how a single debate would transform their lives. What started as a clash over accusations had evolved into a shared mission to unite a divided world. Through humility, curiosity, and unwavering determination, they showed that bridges could be built, not just between ideologies, but between people. In the end, their story served as a reminder that change begins with conversation. By choosing to listen instead of dismiss, to question instead of assume, and to connect instead of divide, James and Kevin proved that even in the most contentious times, hope could prevail, one word at a time.